It begins with a quiet that shouldn't exist, because Christmas Eve is supposed to be loud, crowded, alive, and instead the house on Covina Avenue sits still while Laci Peterson is nowhere to be found. She is 8 months pregnant, the nursery already prepared, the due date so close it feels cruel, and yet the morning passes without a single confirmed sighting. Friends call, neighbors search, volunteers flood the streets, and hope stretches itself thin like it's afraid to snap. And before the town even understands what it's losing, the question creeps in quietly and refuses to leave. How does a woman this visible disappear without sound? Her husband, Scott Peterson, tells police he left that morning to fish alone at the Barclay Marina, a detail that sounds harmless until you realize how alone it really is. He says Laci was walking the dog when he left, wearing black pants and a white top, and this description becomes gospel because it's the last known version of her. Investigators note his calm, his composure, his willingness to talk, but also something harder to define, a distance that doesn't match the moment. And once the words are spoken out loud, they can't be unsaid. If she never came back, then the last person to see her matters more than anyone else. As days turn into weeks, the search intensifies, helicopters scanning fields, divers probing murky water, volunteers combing neighborhoods with a hope that feels rehearsed. Scott gives interviews, attends vigils, and speaks in a voice that never cracks enough to satisfy the cameras following him everywhere. Investigators begin documenting inconsistencies, not contradictions exactly, but moments where the emotional math doesn't add up. And the tension locks in place when police learn Scott wasn't just a husband waiting for his wife to come home, but a man living a parallel life he never mentioned. The affair with Amber Frey doesn't just complicate the narrative, it rewrites it entirely. Scott told her he had lost his wife, and he said this before Laci disappeared, a sentence that lands differently once time catches up to it. When Amber realizes the truth and goes to police, their recorded conversations turn intimacy into evidence, each word heavy with hindsight. The moral tension here is relentless, because infidelity alone isn't murder, but foreknowledge dressed as grief feels like something darker. And once the recordings exist, the story stops asking if Scott is involved and starts asking how far ahead he was thinking. Police search Scott's warehouse and find a small fishing boat, the kind you don't notice until you're told to notice it. Inside, they find a homemade concrete anchor, rough, uneven, heavy, and the detail sits there waiting, because no one can explain why it exists. Scott says it was for the boat, but investigators believe more anchors were made, unseen, unrecovered, possibly already gone. There's no blood, no weapon, no witness, just objects that feel like props in a story no one wants to accept. And the tension deepens because when a case relies on implication, every detail becomes louder than it should be. For months, the case floats in this unbearable limbo, neither resolved nor fading, until April breaks the illusion that time will be kind. On the shoreline of the San Francisco Bay, a fetus washes up, and then a torso, and the words investigators dreaded become official reality. DNA confirms the remains are Laci and her unborn son, Connor Peterson, and grief collapses into horror all at once. The location matters, because it sits near the same bay Scott claimed as his alibi, and coincidence finally runs out of excuses. And in that moment, the question shifts permanently from where is she to what did he do with her? Scott is arrested days later, stopped near the coast with altered hair, large amounts of cash, and supplies that feel unnecessary unless you're not planning to come back. He says he was afraid, overwhelmed, running from the media. But the optics are unforgiving, and the public has already decided what fear looks like. Prosecutors charge him with 2 counts of murder, framing the case as deliberate, planned, and executed under the cover of normalcy. And the tension tightens again, because the trial hasn't even begun, yet the verdict feels like it's already been debated in living rooms across the country. The trial is moved to San Mateo County to escape the saturation coverage. But there is no escaping the weight of expectation hanging over every juror. Prosecutors build their case piece by piece, stacking circumstantial evidence until it resembles inevitability rather than coincidence. They argue Scott made multiple anchors, used the bay as a disposal site, and constructed an alibi that collapsed under its own precision. The defense pushes back, insisting that suspicion isn't proof, that absence of evidence matters more than behavior, and that the state is asking jurors to fill gaps with emotion. And the tension refuses to break, because both sides are right in ways that don't cancel each other out. After months of testimony, the jury convicts Scott Peterson, and the word guilty lands like a door slamming shut rather than relief. He is sentenced to death, and the punishment feels final, even as debate continues outside the courtroom. Some see justice, others see a dangerous reliance on narrative over physical proof, and neither side ever fully backs down. The case becomes a template, a warning, a cultural obsession, and a permanent argument about how certainty is constructed. And the loop tightens again, because once someone is sentenced to die, doubt doesn't disappear, it multiplies. Years pass, appeals grind forward, and in 2020, the California Supreme Court overturns Scott's death sentence due to jury selection errors, while leaving the conviction intact. It's a legal distinction that feels impossible to explain to the families involved, because it says the process failed, not the conclusion. Scott is sentenced to life without parole, a punishment that ensures he will never leave prison, but also never face execution. The case resurfaces in public consciousness, older now, colder, but still unresolved in spirit. And the final tension loop emerges fully formed. How can a story feel finished and unfinished at the same time? In recent years, innocence advocates take renewed interest, filings reopen old questions, and the case enters its modern phase, where evidence is debated by people who weren't alive when it happened. Court coverage continues, dissecting every claim, every motion, every theory that could still change something, even if nothing does. Laci and Connor remain the emotional center, frozen in time, while arguments evolve around them. And that's where the story finally settles, not with closure, but with permanence. Because the most unsettling part isn't deciding whether Scott Peterson is guilty or innocent. It's realizing how fragile certainty becomes when the truth arrives only in fragments.